Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed and YouTube channel. I'm your host, Maxwell Baumbach, and this is the show where we discuss everybody from the biggest of names to the deepest of sleepers. Today, we've got a first-time guest. You may know him from his work on Twitter/X, where his handle is MCFXZ. That is Muhammad. Muhammad, how are you doing today?
Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, I've enjoyed the stuff you've been putting out for a while, and I'm excited to get into it and talk ball with you today. Just a little bit of housekeeping off the top here. Make sure you're subscribed to our content everywhere you can. NoCeilingsNBA.com, our Substack for daily written work. I've got an article coming out probably the day that you're listening to this on Monday on Labaron Philon, who we're going to talk about in a little bit. We've got daily podcasts on our podcast feed and YouTube channel. We've got scouting reports and things like that. They're going to be coming up throughout the year. So make sure you are plugged in over there. For today's episode, what we're going to be talking about are the "Are we sure?" questions about the 2025 NBA draft class. Because I think I've kind of made it a point personally to not to try and stay a little bit more zen throughout this draft class. Like, I feel like my misses in the past have been, I didn't like a guy early and I got a little too stubborn about it. I'm trying to be a little bit more reactive and get as many data points as possible throughout the year. So I think it's better to be like, oh man, I think this, but just to ask the question, like, are we sure? So I wanted to bounce this off you. And I'm going to have you actually open up with with your first question. What's an "Are we sure?" question that you've been thinking about with regard to the 2025 NBA draft?
Okay. Well, you know what? Since we are talking about, reactionary players and, guys that are just super hot right now, I want to ask, are we sure that Egor Demin, the BYU guard, is in the tier 1 of 2025 NBA draft prospect guards relative to guys like Kaspar Sionis, Dylan Harper, and a name that we're going to be talking about in a bit.
I'm pretty sure is how I would answer that question. Now, this is where this gets tricky, at least for me, is I liked his tape coming into the year. Like, he was the guy that coming into the season I had, I think, 8 or 9 before any of the scrimmages or anything like that. And then it started to become evident just by tape and word and stats kind of leaking out of those games that he was playing a pretty dominant brand of basketball. Their schedule hasn't been great, but there are guys that I can point to on Central Arkansas that are good. And same with Idaho, Julius Mims is a real player that I've had serious basketball people bring up to me as a potential NBA prospect. So he's not playing great teams, to be clear, but the teams he's played have a few guys on them where it's that's a guy who could maybe do something to impede his dominance. And it hasn't happened yet. Throughout every game, he just seems completely in control. Prior to the year, I think my hope was that he could be a bouncier version of one of these Bojan Bogdanovic, Joe Engelsy kind of playmaking hub guys. But then he was always kind of a productive defensive player overseas. So I was hoping that would carry over and then make him a more well-rounded, playoff suited version of those guys. But I think with what we've seen, just in terms of the overall feel, the handle, the face-up stuff, the downhill athleticism, and the defense, I'm there with him, and I know he hasn't played real teams, so maybe this bites me later on, but I feel comfortable with him there. Where have you been with Egor kind of coming into the year, and then how do you feel about what you've seen in this weird 5-game sample where it is Central Arkansas, UC Riverside, Queens, North Carolina, Idaho, and Mississippi Valley State?
I mean, for me, heading into the season around, I think it was August and July, I had him 10th on my board. And I think something that really impressed me was his performances at the Adidas Next Gen tournament with Real Madrid's U18 team. Guys like him, Hugo Gonzalez, they played some steep talent in that tournament, specifically guys, for example, Nolan Triardi in the final versus Inset Paris. He was always a guy that impressed me, seeing a guy 6'9", being able to be basically an elite size floor general, having a lot of two-way upside. I think the passing was what really intrigued me for a guy at that size, super fluid. Was always a little skeptical early on about the handle. I think that was something where, a guy at that size may not always be the most fluid on the ball, but for him, he kind of this jumbo size creator. I was always intrigued at how he's able to kind of initiate the offense. I think something that I'm not saying I'm maybe left desired, but I think the creation ability for a guy that size, I've always been curious Is he going to be able to consistently create offense off the dribble? For the time that I've been able to watch him, like I said, in scrimmages and and GT tape, I've been seeing him being a really efficient shooter. I think it's just the inside out game, and also being a consistent play finisher. So I think for me, he's shown a really good bit of that this season. I think, of course, the big talking point is the competition that he's playing.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing, was that I think once we start to see some conference play, especially in a conference that's going to be pretty steep, I think the Big 12 is going to be one of the best, if not the best, in the nation in terms of actual quality of hoops that are going to be played. That's where I'm going to kind of hold my reservations in terms of how he's going to hold up versus talent like there. But I mean, in the current moment, he's probably one of the most informed players right now in the nation. And to be fair, it's just playing the guys that are in front of you and doing the best that you can. And he's done the bit. And I think I'm really impressed with him. I think that's just one of those things where heading into conference play and against more steep competition, I definitely want to see him improve his creativity in terms of his scoring. But I mean, he's shown everything in terms of his playmaking, his facilitating, the ball handling, the defense as well. I think that's something that really goes underrated. And then also the rebounding. I think that guy at 6'9", I think this kind of. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, he feels like a guy who's going to be like a demon in early offense, where it's just going to be like, I get the rebound, I push, and now I might get something right away, whether it's for me or somebody else. And I had a hard time with him just because there weren't a lot of super publicly available data points on him as a shooter. Where it'd be like, oh yeah, he played in this 5-game tournament and shot 40% from three. That's he played in this one and he shot 13%. So it's all right, I don't really know quite what to make of that. Exactly. But I think the volume from three has been really encouraging, if nothing else. So he's taking almost 9 threes per 100 possessions right now, which that is at the very least going to keep opponents honest. So if we're looking positionally at guys sort of in that volume range, that grades out really well for a guy who's going to be a forward. We're talking, around 9 attempts per game. That's around where a Dorian Finney-Smith or a Keegan Murray or a Taurean Prince was in college. That's a really good number of just attempts and getting it off. So even if percentage-wise he ends up being okay, I think he can get by being okay with everything else that he's bringing to the table. Yeah. I think your point about Big 12 play, where I'm really interested to see with it, is the more daring stuff. So the first game against Central Arkansas, I was going crazy. I was super excited. And then Nathan on our team texted me and he was like, I really worry about what some of this stuff is going to look like against good teams, where it gets a little more egregious. Some of the stuff he does as a passer is really daring. I think what I'm most interested to see is how the consensus shapes around his defense as the year progresses, because he does some egregious gambling that against Central Arkansas, maybe a guy doesn't really sustain the advantage and finish off of it after you recklessly tried to jump a passing lane. And then your guy, had to pull up for a mid-range shot instead of getting all the way to the rim. When it is Big 12 play and you are trying really aggressively to get to passes and help at the rim, and you're playing against guys that are a little bit more capable of taking advantage of you, both from a feel and athleticism standpoint, what is that going to look like? Right now, the defensive playmaking numbers are awesome. And I generally prefer the Tari Eason, take the guy who I know can do this stuff, and then just have him scale it back and figure out the timing on it.
Exactly.
But I do worry a hair about are there going to be games where this stuff looks really bad?
100%. I think one of the things that you are sure of is, does the guy have the vision? Does he have the playmaking ability to do that? Obviously, like you mentioned, once he comes to play these kind of steep competition, I think those passing windows start to really dwindle down. Where against teams like Idaho, Central Arkansas, they were very just wide open. A lot of touch passes, just very pocket into the shooter's hands, or just sometimes off the glass. Some of those kind of things will just not fly against much better competition. So I definitely do agree that in tighter competition, these kind of windows close, and I think that's where he's going to have to improvise a lot more. Where we have been able to see a lot more jumbo creative guards from the Europe and those kind of areas been able to kind of flourish in those ends. But I think something that differs from a guy like a Luka Doncic in that manner at that same age was the handle and the tightness of it.
Yeah.
So I think if he is met with a lot of length and physicality on the ball, he might struggle again. This is one of those things where I wish he was able to play in the FIBA tournament this upcoming summer, where I think Russia wasn't allowed to play. So that's one of those things where we are missing those kind of tapes. So I'm really relying heavily on these kind of first sets of games. And then, his time at Madrid in the next gen tournament at Adidas. So again, it's one of those things where he's kind of an interesting player where you're just taking what you see at face value, but you're trying to project them out. I think that's one of those things preseason, prior to the tape and just watching just the AMGT. I'm kind of projecting him as like more of a playmaking wing, a guy that, maybe could have some secondary playmaking upside. But I think he's shown, like you mentioned, like on higher usage, he's been very effective. I think one of the things that's been really intriguing is the catching and shooting. He's 7%, where he is showing that he is viable in terms of perimeter shooting. Where if he is able to be scaled back, he is showing that he's maybe a potential reliable floor spacing option. So it's one of those things where we do see guys in previous classes where when they're able to be very creative on the ball and kind of these secondary auxiliary playmakers, they can also make things done with the ball in their hands, and also they provide length, defense, shooting. I think they provide much value. So it's one of those things where you just kind of have to see how the season plays out. But I think it is comfortable to say that he is in that tier one level of guards. When I look at guys like, for example, Kasper Strakosionis, again, another really great, maybe jumbo size creative playmaker, a guy that can also score really well on the ball. And that's kind of a consistent thing that we're seeing with a lot of these European guys, that they're very fundamentally sound when it comes to creativity on the ball and initiating offenses. And I think for like Strakosionis as well, being able to play against maybe steep competition, but very recently in Alabama showing out against a top 5 team in the country. So again, it's one of those things where guys like him, Dylan Harper, they've been very effective on the ball and just being able to initiate offenses and create things for themselves as well as their teammates. And I think for a guy like Nolan Trier, where we're going to be speaking about him very shortly, this is kind of where him actually playing that competition. What have you seen? Especially for him playing in a very steep talented league in France. It's one of those things where he is struggling versus competition, but when they did play against each other in the final, it was a really great competition. So it's one of those things where you kind of see the season play out, but I think you have some good feeling about him heading into conference play, and there's one of those things where you just have to play against the guy in front of you, and if he's able to be effective, continue it on. But he's been in really great form, and I think I can comfortably say that he is at the current moment in that tier one level of cards.
I'm right there with you, and I think it would be different if he was like playing good but not great against these.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then if like people bring the cart ahead of the horse, it would be different. But it feels like, I think he's got like a 15 BPM or something like that currently, where it's like, all right, like if you're dominating against these guys, I can sell myself a little bit more on that.
Exactly. And that's one of those things where he's being able to stuff the stat sheet and be effective on both ends. I'd understand if he was this heliocentric on offense, then he was just, nothing on defense. With him, he's at that size, I presume that, a guy, he's very active on defense, great hands. He's very smart. I think that's one of those things where he's going in the right place at the right time. And obviously that length bars very well, for example, as like a weak side rim protector. He's being able to make sure that he can kind of wreak havoc on the defensive end. So again, one of those things where that length will bode very well against really good competition. And, at the next level, being able to be a guy that can space the floor really well, play make, and being able to offer a lot defensively in that playmaking department will definitely help them come next summer. So we'll see. But
for sure. I just love the overall versatility with him.
100%.
And on that topic, we're actually going to shift gears to my next question here, which is this is a controversial one. I completely admit that up front. Are we sure Nolan Trier is a better prospect than Labaron Philon? So I'm gonna throw that one to you first. Like, where are you at with these two?
Now, for me, I've always been a Nolan Trier truther. I think, again, his time, again, speaking to the same tournament, the Adidas Next Gen tournament, he was a guy that, he put up some ridiculous numbers for Inset Paris, being able to take his team all the way to the final, including, I believe, a 45-point performance against Barcelona and Kasper Strakosionis, where he was just a dominant scoring guard. Again, a 6'4" guy, really, really fast and super twitchy. A guy that, again, one of the things that I really like in guards is being able to see if they can really generate high level rim touches. And that's a thing that Nolan Trier does consistently, being able to get to the rim with his blazing speed and kind of agility. I think one of the things that he's been successful at in his entirety of his career is being able to get to the rim. Of course, once he's been, met with a lot more physicality and length, at the pro league, that's where he's been able to struggle with that frame. But I think a thing that has kind of been his swing has been his jump shot. And that's one of those things where for a guy like Nolan, he's been struggling essentially in the FIBA summer, as well as the start to the season at St. Quentin. And I think that's one of the things where on the flip side, when looking at a guy like Labaron Philon, where, you see another 6'4" guard where he's able to be a very elite scoring guard, heading into the season, being able at Alabama, I think something that's really surprised me is how he's just able to do a lot. For him, he's a guy that's been really active defensively. Again, a guy that's been able to average 12, basically 13 points, 4 rebounds, and 5 assists. I think the thing that's really surprising me is the 3-point shooting. I was always skeptical about his shooting heading into the season. He's a guy that is able to really create, again, a lot of rim touches and a lot of mid-range shots, but the 3-point shooting is a little suspect for me. I want to be able to see a lot more. Right now, it's currently 30% from 3, but again, a guy that is able to score the ball really well. I think the playmaking is really exceptional, and the defense as well. He's been able to show against really high-level competition, that against Purdue, against Illinois, that he's able to affect both ends of the floor. So very steep question, but I think for the current moment right now, I think I'm going to always take form. I think the guy's best form is what you see right in front of us. So I think at the current moment, it might be too steep to say, but I'll say Labaron Philon at the current moment is better than Nolan Chari. But I think when you look at resume and a full CV, of course I'm going to have to take Nolan Chari. I think I'm not a player that likes to hold rough patches against guys, especially when I know what they're capable of. And there are, on the flip side, guys that are on super really good runs, and sometimes they're just super fire. So for me, I think one of those things that I hope to see more of from Nolan Chari is just to improve the shooting, and also being able to create more offensively off the dribble when met with physicality and length. But yeah, at the current moment, Labaron Philon is one of the best freshmen in the class. I currently have him, I believe, 16th on my updated board as of yesterday. So. I mean, he's a guy that he's just continuing to shoot up boards. I think for him, if he continues to improve on his perimeter shooting, then the sky's the limit for him. I think a guy that can be able to create at all 3 levels, a guy that is very effective, and again, a guy that can wreak havoc on the defensive end. He's a real good tone setter, and I hope to see this consistency play out through the season, of course, in conference play. I think he is showing all the bit of a elite level guard in this class. So yeah, in that current I'm gonna take over Nolan. What do you think?
I'm like really big into Labaron Philon. Like, this is the guy that I've probably tried the most to like settle down about this year. Like and like part of it is like I do still like the tacky stuff. Like I love a guy with good body language. I love a guy that looks like he'd be fun to play with. And like Labaron Philon is that. But on like paper as well, like statistically, what he has put together thus far is super impressive to me. Alabama had an All-American guard and Mark Sears coming back, and I think just the fact that the coaching staff is giving Philon the reins and saying like, you're kind of going to be the guy that for the most part sets people up on this team, I think speaks volumes about how good he had to have looked in the build up to this season. And it is early, and like I think it is always important to be really cautious early on in the year about like how excited we get about players. But I think his resume against the teams that they've played is one of the better ones for prospects in this class. Where like we mentioned like the Illinois and Purdue games, where like he scored 16 against Illinois, 18 against Purdue, 9 assists in the Illinois game, 4 against Purdue. But even the first 3 games where it's UNC Asheville, who's like made the tournament like in recent history, Arkansas State, who has a ton of like old guards that are really talented and are probably around like a top 120-ish team in the country. And then same with McNeese. Like McNeese has been stellar the last few years. Like it's not like they're playing like bottom of the barrel D1 programs. Like they're playing legit mid-major teams. So I think the fact that he's been good against those teams and then 2 Big Ten teams, like it's hard for me to not get excited. And then additionally, I just think with the types of guards that we've seen succeed in the playoffs last 3 years, they look a lot like this. They're super high field. They can get paint touches. They can really pass the ball. They have a variety of ways to impact the game. They rebound. They, create events on defense. Like everything that you could hope to see in a modern guard, Philon is doing. And he's 6'4". He's really slender. And we'll touch on that in a minute, but I think just his ability to get downhill is unbelievable. Like it feels like everything is looked off with him. Like his head is the most on a swivel of a lot of the guards in this class. Like he's always looking in different directions. You don't know if he's going to pass. You don't know if he's going all the way to the rim, if he's setting himself up, if he's disguising where the ball is going to go. The speed changes are unbelievable. Like it's breakneck deceleration into wild burst. And yeah, like the passing vision is great. He's really tough. Where I worry, and where I worry about him is just with that frame. He's like 177 right now. So if he comes into the NBA, he's going to be like one of the smallest guys weight wise in the league. And he's made some tough finishes, but like he has to settle for some pretty tough rim angles because of like the limits on his physicality. I think sometimes his gather footwork could be a little better too. And then defensively, like stock rates are great, like really good timing with his hands, can get into passing lanes, good flexibility, things like that. But like when he does get met with contact on a screen, it's rough. Like it is really rough. So I like the optimist in me is like, what if he's Derek White? What if he's like he's not as big as Alonzo Ball, obviously, but like that type of guy where it's like, he's going to connect the dots. He's going to do this and that. And then the pessimist in me is like, well, if he doesn't shoot it, is he more of like a Trey Jones style player, which is fine, but it's just not as exciting. And then like where I get really scared is like we're in year 2 of Kobe Buffkin and he's not playing NBA minutes. So like if we're taking like the skinny combo guard who produces on defense, like, are we sure that that's going anywhere? Because with Traore, like I'm just going to be straight up, like I'm really concerned about what we've seen so far. Like the true shooting percentage at a lot of levels like has never really been good, and like the true shooting percentage, the guards that have low true shooting percentages generally I feel like are guys who look more like Philon. They're the DeAnthony Meltons, the Trey Joneses, the Bruce Browns, the DeJounte Murrays. Like it's guys more in that mold that are like super athletic, bringing more of their value on defense than on offense. Where with Traore, I feel like I'm looking at a guy where I worry about the quickness and strength on defense. He doesn't really rebound at all. Like the shot isn't going in right now. I love the volume. I think the shot probably gets like respectable at some point, just based on how willing he is to shoot it, especially off pull-ups. But like all in all, like I just see a guy who really kind of needs the ball, probably isn't going to be good enough to really command it, and then doesn't do a whole lot else. With Philon, I'm like, if you just get stronger, like I'm getting everything I want. So like I'm really inclined to go toward Philon, but I don't know if I'm like being a little too safe in some senses with that.
100%. And I think something that was really intriguing when I was watching some Philon tape part of the season was the kind of talent that he was playing at when he's at Link Academy, playing against next guys like Jasper Johnson, Trey Johnson, these elite like lead guard, like lead on ball dominant guys. So he's able to make his value be effective, especially off the ball. So he's shown that he has a knack for scoring, especially in the EYBL, especially at the EYBL Scholastic as well. He is able to score the ball and be effective as an off-ball guy. So in terms of scaling down, he's shown that he does not need to have the ball effectively to score. I think one of those things, as you mentioned, the perimeter shooting, that's kind of, again, it's a very big swing skill. If he is able to be a guy, I think in the Purdue game, that's where he was able to shoot 3 for 4 from 3. So he is showing that, you know, he can shoot to a respectable level. It's one of those things, is it sustainable? And again,
I wanted to pick your brain on that because, like, looking into the pre-college numbers, like he shot really well from 3 at Link, but did not in EYBL. And it was one of those ones where it's like, ooh, okay, like I love that 40% at Link. I didn't love that like 25 in EYBL. So like what's what? So like again, like the optimistic side of me is like, he's shown he can do it, but then the pessimistic side of me is like, well, what is he really? Like, is he, I don't know.
It's that swing that he has with him that kind of has me skeptical. And I think that's where right now in college, he's kind of middling out at that, you know, low 30% range. I think something that's always been consistent is that herky-jerky, like slashing ability. And again, that's one of those things where when he is met with physicality, that's where he kind of struggles a bit. But again, I think the things that you love is the ability that he makes these quick reads. Of course, he's being able to be very decisive. Something that was really surprising is his ability to be active on the glass. I think that was something that really surprised me. He is a guy that actually makes a concerted effort to be effective on the glass, on the offensive end as well too. 2 of them in really clutch moments against Purdue. So a guy that's able to really show his potential on both ends of the floor. I think the concern with the physicality, I've been seeing people bill him as more of an on-ball guy in terms of defending as a POA guy. But I think if that physicality is kind of a concern, especially at the next level, because all the things that I'm thinking about at the next level, he probably might have to make his billing as more of an off-ball guy. Again, with that kind of screen navigation, that's one of those things I'm probably going to be a little bit concerned about. But so far, what I've watched, I've loved Labaron Philon, and I think it's one of those things where projecting him out to the season was pretty surprising heading into the year, especially with that kind of team of Mark Sears and the kind of transfer portal guys that they were bringing in, I did not
Mm-hmm.
expect him to kind of be the crown jewel of the youth talent there, especially bringing a guy like Aiden Holloway, young blood, right? It's crazy to think that he was a guy that would emerge of that group. But again, he's making his presence known, and I've always been fond of Bama producing really high end guard talent, and this is no different. But I think he brings a different element than all the other guys on Bama. And I think it was surprising when I was watching him down the stretch of the game in Illinois, where Mark Sears was really playing poor. That was where he was able to really step up and kind of command that offense. So yeah, I love what I've seen from him, and I think it's fair to say that at the current moment, you can really see him be a lot more better at the current moment than Nolan. Where at the next level, where is he able to kind of make his call, especially if he's not able to effectively shoot on the ball, and obviously with that size, again, he's a really great playmaker. I think the biggest thing is if guys are able to get downhill to the rim, you can project him out to be a really great guard talent. But if he isn't able to shoot, you just add him to the long list of guys that are what ifs in terms of the perimeter shooting, having the blazing speed. And I think he has these intangibles that are really effective on both ends, but it's kind of putting it all together. And I think the frame is what kind of holds him back, and the ability to kind of take that next step, which if you did watch him at the Adidas Next Gen tournament, when you're watching the scoring upside, I think he averaged 23 points for inset. That's one of those things where heading into the summer for FIBA, I really expected him to kind of take this next level leap. Similar to a guy like Kasper Strakasionis, where he was playing really well for Barcelona, and then playing for the Lithuania team. I think he made it to the quarterfinals with Lithuania's team, and he took a really big leap. And I think the biggest thing with him was I was kind of skeptical in terms of the scoring for Kasparis, but he was able to show that at the next level in terms of real grown man talent, and also great talent at the young level, and being able to effectively score the ball, shoot the ball well, continuing his playmaking repertoire. So it's one of those things where if you're just taking what you see, but of course I'm really holding on really tight to this ANGT tape. But yeah, projecting the season, I really love Labaron Philon. So wonderful question.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to take a quick break and be back with some more questions on the 2025 draft class. Stick with us. Mohammed, it is your time to throw out another question. What is another "Are you sure?" or "Are we sure?" question that you have?
Sure. So the question that I have right now is: are we sure that Jalil Bethea, the Miami guard, is he a lottery talent this season, let alone a one and done guy? I think the reason I'm asking this question is I'm very surprised as to the lack of opportunity that he's been getting right now. And Miami right now is playing 11 minutes right now, averaging 6 points, 1 rebound, half an assist on 36% field goal percentage. I think something that was kind of surprising with me is, especially when you look at Jim Larinaga teams and Miami, he really loves his guard play. And, especially a guy like Jalil Bethea, where he offers a lot in terms of his NBA range shooting, high level athleticism, and also his ability to translate that athleticism functionality wise on the defensive end. I'm really surprised that he isn't really being featured a lot. And, I think as these games go on and, for example, some blowout games that Miami has played in, he's really not been featured as much. I think 14 minutes is the highest that he's been included in. So I think that bears the question, is he a guy that is considered a lottery talent this year, or do we see him as a 2-year guy? But is he even a one and done talent for this upcoming draft? What do you think?
I don't think he is. I was lower on him, I think, coming into the year than a lot of people. Like I don't believe he was top 60 on my initial board. Like I just worry about this type of player quite a bit, where like I believe he's listed closer to like 6'5" or something like that. And I just felt like on the film, I didn't think he was particularly big. Like I thought he was going to be a guy who like legitimately measured quite a bit shorter. If he went to the combine or an event like that. Could be wrong, just pure like eye test on that. But I kind of saw a guy who was small, not super physical, took some frustrating shots, and then I was like a little torn on the passing. Like there were definitely moments where like the basic stuff was there, and like he could look off his feeds and things like that on the high school tape. But I also thought at times it could get really frustrating. So if I'm looking at projecting him at Miami throughout the year, and I've got Nigel Pack, who like maybe has some of these tendencies, but I know he's like a really great shooter. And you're getting Jalen Blackman in from Stetson, who's like a similar kind of phenomenon where like he's 6'3", very wired to score. like those two guys just have a lot more experience. And then I'm thinking about how am I building around those guys? And it's the Matt Clevelands, the Lynn Kids, the Brandon Johnson, like the big physical forward. Like those are the kind of guys I want around them. So I really thought there was a good chance it was going to be more 6-man oriented. I do think I just have been left kind of the same place I was with the high school tape with him in the college film so far. Like I'm just kind of left wanting more. Like I don't quite see the overall efficiency. I think there is, like to your point, like the functional athleticism and quickness, like especially side to side, like east-west, the step backs, like he can get into that. But to earn a role on this team, and again, Miami struggled, but with those two guards specifically in front of him, like he's going to have very little margin for error as a scorer. And he's going to have to really iron out the consistency as a passer for them to even consider going to like a 3-guard lineup. So like, I just kind of think this is what his minute situation is going to be this year. Whether or not he can take a step forward and develop more of a traditional guard game this offseason, I think that kind of remains to be seen. But like, I just have a hard time seeing him displacing either of those guys so far.
100%. And again, he's one of those guys where, heading into, you knew that he was going to be this volume shooter guy where he needs to have up like 10 to 15 shots a game to put his impact on the game. And if not, then it's chalked at that point. And I think that was something that I kind of seen last year with Keyshawn George, where I think he was 6th in minutes played at that team, but he led the team in plus minus. And I think one of those things where guys like him, unless they're providing inherent value in terms of, for example, Keyshawn George, where he was just a blazing shooter last year, 43% from the field, catch and shoot, as well as his defense that he provides in the secondary playmaking. These are things that we just don't see with a guy like Bethea. So I think if the minute situation like this, I think it's 12 minutes in the last 4 games that he's kind of averaging a game. I don't expect it to get any better, especially as the competition improves and we start to see conference play more. But it's a surprise to me. I think from him, he was a guy where he was a lottery guy heading into the year. And I think as kind of the season has progressed so far in the first month, he's kind of just matriculating out of my board. And eventually, I mean, if this continues out, then I think I'm just projecting him as a year 2 guy. Or, I mean, I don't know if he's even going to plan to stay at Miami. I think one of those teams where on his age, it was on the move. And I think that was one of those things where, there was a bid for him to go to Syracuse initially. And, I think he would flourish in a system like that, very guard heavy system. And I kind of don't know the direction that they're at right now, I would have really preferred for him in a system where he has the ball in his hands, because I think that's where he's able to really show his value. But
yeah, it is so tricky because like on paper, the Miami fit makes sense. Like they like to feature this kind of guard. It's just he came at a time where they already have 2 of them. Exactly. And like 2 of them that are also like 22, 23 years old. So it's going to be tough. If you were to portal, I don't think Syracuse would be a bad option at all, to your point.
Yeah, but it's crazy. It's crazy to think that, I mean, that is the beauty of picking fit. I think when you go, I think a guy that had that fit, that was a great fit, and it's just not working out. But there's just certain guys where they're able to be in offenses where they are the focus, and they're able to really effectively show why they're a high level scorer. And I think for a guy like Joel Bethea, he needs to find other ways to make impact. Again, right now, 36% from the field, he's just not hitting. And I think that's the build that he has. When he is not hitting, where is he going to be able to offer his value? So I think in the current moment, I don't see him as a one and done guy. I think he's starting to fall out of my board entirely. So, which it's no problem. I think when you look at him, 6'5", he's extremely athletic and NBA range shooting. That is somebody that has NBA aspirations. I just think at the current moment he's just not doing anything to improve his stock. I think one of those things where he might just project to be out, a 2-3 year guy. If he does stay at Miami, maybe he moves out and kind of gets some more higher increased role usage. So we'll see. But at the current moment, that's kind of where I stand with him. And it's crazy to see the freshman in this year. It's kind of
there's always a couple. Yeah, there's always a couple both ways that either pop off or just like immediately hit some sort of wall, whether it's like minutes or production or what. And it feels like this year he's going to be one of those guys where it's like you just hope that he can either emerge later in the year and find his role, or find it either there next year or somewhere else. To kind of flip things around, I want to ask you about a guy who is like tilted completely in the opposite direction in terms of play style. Are we sure that Marquette Jr. Chase Ross is not a top 60 prospect at this point? So Chase Ross is a 6'4" defensive menace guard. The steal rate this year it's almost at 6, but for his career it's just below 4, and a block rate just below 2. all over the place, really good at the point of attack. Offensively, he'd always left something to be desired. Seems like he may have turned a corner this year. Am I getting a little too over eager thinking that Chase Ross is a top 60 guy? Like, what do you think of what you've seen out of him so far?
I think for me right now, when I look at a guy like Chase Ross, of course, the defense is something that you really, really love to see. I think a guy 6'4", again, a guy that's able to just play make defensively and just be everywhere on the perimeter. You love to see that. When I look at that aspect of the floor, I think it's 100%. I can say he's a top 60 guy on the defensive end. Now, I think where I'm kind of left to be desired is the offensive end. I think his limited creative ability on the ball, and I think the shooting outside of spot up opportunity is kind of where I'm a little hesitant on. I think that's one of those things where I think as the season progresses, if he's going to continue, I really do see him as this kind of spot up guy that's going to be able to kind of shoot the ball and space the floor in that right. But in terms of creating off the dribble, that's kind of where I'm a little skeptical about in terms of his top 60 upside. But again, the defensive end, I mean, for what he brings, there are guys, like specialists make it into the league, and especially guys at his size that are able to really wreak havoc on that end and also offer some ability to space the floor. They make a name in themselves in the league. And I think when you look at a guy like him, there is a track record and a pathway for success to him. So it's just a matter of being able to see him do more on the offensive end to kind of put the ball down on the ground if he's able to kind of create. But I mean, when you look at that team, looking at guys like Cam Jones, where he's on an All-American run at this point in terms of scoring, guys like David Joplin. There's just a lot of guys on that team in terms of points to be fed around. But I mean, he's making his name and his impact be felt on that end. But I think the defensive end, that's where I could 100% see he'd be drafted just specifically on that end, mid to late second round. But I love what I'm seeing from him. So I don't know, where do you stand with him on that?
Yeah, I think top 60's like probably a little rich, but it's one of those things where I'm like, if I'm projecting out, like, I think that's an outcome that's 100% on the table. Like, to your point, like, there are specialists, I think specifically in this mold, that have worked where like the ball skill stuff is a little shaky. Like, it is a little bit wide handled. It's a little bit like sped up just in general. Cause like he's also a guy where the athleticism is awesome, but like when it's not a dunk, like there's just an occasional smoked layup because like he is guns blazing all the time, which is awesome. It's why he's so good defensively. But like that level of like the AJ Mitchell, like I'm immediately kind of slamming on the brakes and now I'm going up and I'm finishing with touch. Like that is not here yet. I don't know if it ever will be. But yeah, like I just see how much of a defensive playmaker he is, how much more comfortable he looks putting the ball on the deck as opposed to a year ago. I feel like he's seeing the floor like pretty well. Like he's not the most advanced playmaker by any means, but I think he has like solid vision. The shot, I think the shot is going to like really swing a lot of it. Because if he can knock stuff down and then get to a point where like you can play him off of a big initiator, which is a phrase I hate using because it's like, yeah, if you put like everybody next to Jason Tatum, they look good. I know. But I think in that context, because the first step is so good, if the shot's there, then like he can really provide a level of offensive value. And then the defense is where you're really getting the most of it. And that's where you can see that like Gary Payton the second outcome, like potentially where it's like, this is a guy that can fly around. He can finish lobs. Like you can do some unconventional stuff with him that you don't normally get out of a guard. And then he's going to give you like a real playmaking punch on the other end. Now, if you look at Gary Payton's like offensive role in college, like he did everything for his team. Like Chase Ross is not doing that. He's still very much the second guy on this Marquette team. Whereas like Gary Payton II, had 5 assists his second year at Marquette per game and like took 13 shots per game. Where like everything with Chase Ross is still very secondary. And I'd say that's where the case gets a little bit weaker. But I think if he holds up offensively throughout the year, at the very least, he's the guy that we come back to for 2026. And we have to have a real conversation about it at that point.
100%. And it's one of those things where when I look at him, I think things that are consistent, of course, the slashing ability, I think something that definitely will help him in terms of that swing is his ability to attack closeouts. I think those are things where, these are things where if he can do those kind of skill sets, it will project him good on the next end on the offensive side. It's just side note, but just watching him and Stevie Mitchell play together, it's just, they're a problem.
They're so fast. Like, you shouldn't be allowed to have two guys that fast on the floor at the same time.
Those
like,
two guys and Cam Jones, it's Guantanamo Bay. It's fun to watch.
I think you just hope that, like, and you don't want to, I'm always like uncomfortable being like, well, this guy did it, so why can't he? But like, I think the hope would be that the way Cam Jones has like just so seamlessly transitioned into this on-ball role that like maybe this year, if Chase Ross getting a little bit more of those secondary reps, that like next year Cam's gone, now it's like his turn a little bit more and he can kind of take those steps forward. I think 2025, like, it'd probably be pushing it for him to go in this year. But I think with how guys have gotten better at Marquette, and then to see overall, like there is like an NBA value to the skill set here that I think makes him super appealing.
Again, and it's one of those things where I think when opportunity presents itself next year, hopefully with increased usage, that's where, you already know what he brings you on the standalone side on the defensive end with his abilities. I think a guy that is just super twitchy, super fast. Of course, his ability to play lanes and instinct are just, that's going to allow him to be projecting really well on that end. I think that's one of those things where, when Cam Jones does, go to his future endeavors, I think that's where he could be featured more potentially as a lead guy. But it's just one of those things where, the handling, the slashing is there. And it's just being able to see if he can kind of put that all together and as well as the shooting. So I think for him right now, the spot up is solid. And it's just one of those things where can he kind of put the ball down on the ground. And I think these guys that are super hectic and super fast, once they kind of learn to kind of change their pace and be able to play at different speeds, that's where he's kind of unlock that game. And for me, it's not even that I'm asking him to be a consistent three-point shooter, a sub 40% guy. If he's able to kind of develop like a floater around the rim, being able to offer himself as like off-ball mover, a cutter, he can find inherent value on that end, but also bring really good things on the defensive end. So I think as a 2026 guy, I can see him be there. I think as a 2025, that might be a little too steep, but it's good to mention him. And that's the case usually with guys like this, where they kind of flare themselves as, a second or third option on a guy. When hopefully their lead one number guy leaves, they're going to show themselves as the lead guy, and you can kind of see the progression. And I think that's one of those big things that you love to see in upperclassmen, that kind of steadily progression in terms of his usage, scoring, and ultimately his shooting, as we hope. So a lot to like in a guy like Chase Ross, definitely a one-man defensive menace. I love what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Yep, I'm a fan. We're going to do one more break and we'll be back with two more questions about the 2025 draft class. All right, Mohammed, last one from you. What is your final "are we sure" question on the 2025 NBA draft?
All right, my final "are we sure" question is: are we sure Kaman Malawak and Roko Zakarski are clear better big men talents than Asa Newell from Georgia?
I like Newell quite a bit more than Zakarski so far. Like, that's the one where I'm like, yes, I am in agreement here. So to do my Rocco take really quickly, like I look, the shot blocking and like the rim protection is pretty undeniable. Like he just forces so many bad shots that, like, even in games where maybe the shot blocking total isn't the highest, like he's altering a ton of shots and just making his presence felt. He's a rim deterrent. And offensively, like I think his hands are pretty good. Like, he's had some nice like one hand catches for lobs this season. Big time catch radius, pretty easy off the floor. I just worry about, like, and not to sound like rude, but like all the other stuff with him where like there are ball skill limitations. Like, he looks a little bit clunky when he has to dribble or pass. I don't really like I know he's like taking a three here or there. I'm not like too concerned with that, but like he still has like a really low field goal percentage because he's really easy to bump around. Like, he's not a great rebounder, especially on defense. Like, there was a play in where
I've seen that. I've kind of been shocked, like, especially in the different tournaments in Australia, the NBL. He's really been averse to rebounding and kind of doing big man things, like, really setting great screens, rebounding. That size at 7'3". You'd think a guy with like a 7'6" wingspan would be really at least flat rate, like solid at that end, but but again, it's one of those things where does opportunity present itself. He hasn't really been playing as much this year, but I mean,
and there've been like a couple plays I've seen too where he will like really seed positioning from a box out perspective. Like, there will be a guy behind him and like he'll like feel their body and then still like almost position himself behind the guy, and it's like no, like just box him out. Like, what are you doing here? Like, it's been really frustrating for me, and like from that standpoint. And then like he's still like, he's got some like raw big man traits, which is normal because he's 18, but like he can get baited out of position, like doesn't look great in the space, which like some of this stuff like I can live with. Like I see him as more of like a longer term, like you're taking him because he's 7'2" and like sort of knows how to play basketball. And like when you're that big and you can be that kind of rim deterrent, like there's a place for you.
Exactly.
My thing with him is I just don't know like how valuable it is in absence of those other things. And when he's not as strong as a guy like Walker Kessler, who came out of the gate like guns blazing, but then it's like, oh yeah, like this guy can't really pass or dribble or do some of this other stuff. Like maybe he's just a really good backup center or like a low end starting five. Like that's my issue with Sikarsky is I see him like kind of in that vein right now. So it's like, I just don't really get what the value play is there. Where with Malawak, like, look, he's had some rough plays. Like he's got to be careful about verticality. Like the timing can be really bad as a leaper. Like I feel like he's had a bajillion goaltends already. But he's a lot stronger than Sikarsky. He's a lot more aggressive. He's a lot more physical. He goes up stronger. I think like the hand-eye, generally speaking, is a little bit better defensively.
Toucher on the rim. I love the toucher. PNR situations. He's really well in there, I think, in terms of the rim protection. Again, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying you just pick apples to oranges when in terms of the rim protection with both of these guys. But I think in terms of the feel, I see that's where there's just clear differences. And in terms of like that physicality, as you mentioned with a guy like Walker Kessler, in terms of that difference with Rocco, where he does lack that kind of strength, and especially being a very dominant interior force. Where when I look at a guy like Kaman, especially in this game that we just seen in Arizona, he shot a three. He is showing that there is some shooting touch with him. Where when I look at a guy like Asa and Malawa, I'm kind of grouping them together, but them having real shooting touch to themselves, they kind of find a way to separate themselves from guys like Rocco, where they have these kind of supplementary skills to them that allow them to expand on what they already have in terms of their being an interior force, rim protection. And now when I look at a guy, for example, like Asa, it's just little things that I'm picking where I'm like, this will really work well on the next end. And that's where I'm kind of posing the question. Are these guys that we think are very dominant interior forces, do they present themselves as better prospects? But I don't know, for a guy like, when you look at all these other skills that he provides in terms of the ball handling, kind of the fluidity, and as well as, of course, the floor spacing ability, it's hard to not think that he will project really well at the next end. Depending if it's at a 4 position, that's probably where I think he projects best at, versus the 5, where maybe the frame might be a question at that end. But at the next level, in terms of his face-up skill, there is so much to love with guys like Ace. I'm super high on him. I currently have him 6th on my board, which too rich, but I think with a guy like him, you like it? I think for me,
I have him top 10. So I'm in a similar place as you with that. So I want to dive into the face-up stuff with you, because that was like where I was leery. I like tall guys that can shoot, and like just generally speaking, like Asa this year, the shot hasn't like fallen. It is super high from 3. At least the last time I like checked the overall numbers. Like I feel like every game I watch him shoot 3s, they look really good. He takes a healthy amount of them. They just don't go in. But he shot it really well prior to college for a guy relative to a guy his size. What I was nervous about with him is like I like the tall guy that shoots and can do stuff defensively. Was because his role at the prep level was very like relegated to more of like what like a floor-ish NBA role would look like for him, where it's like he shoots, he dunks, he passes the ball, and then he plays defense. Like I wasn't really sure how the downhill stuff was gonna look with him. And then in the first game, he had a play where it was like semi-transition, and he did like a nice little Euro step to get to a dunk. And I was like, oh, all right. Like, I know that's one play, but that looked good. Did you feel better about that stuff coming into the year? Or is it more, or have you more been won over by what we've seen on this tape so far?
I think in terms of the shooting, I've definitely been a little skeptical, as you mentioned on that, and especially at the prep level and the high school level. He was going from like, this past season and his senior season at Montverde, he was a 43% three-point shooter, where, I think that's where you could say it was kind of the fakest in terms of, that squad. When we look at the amount of shooting that they bring, I think for him in his previous years from like 35% in his freshman season to 30% in his junior season, or in his sophomore season, and then 24% in his junior season. For me, I do like the mechanics in the shot release, but I think it's just one of those things where it can't translate to the next end as a consistent guy. But I'm a big fan of guys that are big, that can shoot. It'll just it'd be interesting for me, at least if like, on the dribble shooting progresses, but it's a good start so far for him
Yeah.
at the collegiate level. I like what I'm seeing. I think the biggest thing that I really want to emphasize is for him to develop a floater or some type of kind of consistent jumper in face-up situations. He did shoot in his senior season 73% from the rim and then 43% from non-rim twos. So I think for him, if he's able to kind of develop on that end in the face-up, it can really change the way that he's defended as kind of like a roll man. So I think I do like the touch. It's just one of those things. If you can move on that end and you kind of develop some kind of middle game in that free throw line area, it will really kind of add a new dimension to his game. But I really like what I'm seeing right now so far. He's providing a lot of great value in terms of playing on the inside as well as spacing the floor defensively as well. I definitely like the 1-2 punch with him and Samto, but yeah, it's kind of one of those things where as the season progresses, he's just going to continue to show more in terms of his floor spacing and face-up skill ability, but a lot to like with him. And I think at the current moment, because this is one of those things where you're projecting out production versus potential. In terms of potential, I have to love a guy in terms of Kaman and what he provides. But I think for what I'm seeing right now, I'm surely going to take a guy like Asa in terms of kind of all these supplementary skills that he provides in terms of his fluidity, ball handling, passing ability. And yeah, I think what you mentioned, him playing more NBA-like roles, especially when you're playing against a guy like Cooper and Derek Queen in the high school level, it's really just finding where you find best in between. So he's been able to do a lot of great things, kind of on that end. And I do like what I'm seeing so far at Georgia. So I think I can kind of say right now that in terms of clear better, I don't think he's clear. I think Rocco is not a better prospect in terms of its entirety over a guy like Asa. But I think between Kaman and Asa, it's more of projecting the next level and upside. But I think what we've seen, kind of a consistent theme in the last couple of drafts is, don't gamble on production. And I think when you look at a guy like Asa, you have to like what you're seeing so far in terms of everything that he brings, in terms of his comfortability on the ball. So for me, I'm going to take him as a top guy of those three. But in terms of upside, you can't not love what you're seeing from Kaman right now, and especially the shooting touch. If it's real, it's very scary. What he's going to do.
Yeah, Kaman shot I know it's like Basketball Africa League and it's not like the highest level of competition, but a shot is a shot, and he took 33 threes in 9 games there and made like 10 of them. Like, I kind of think Kaman's going to shoot. And I think 100%. Kaman's also like, I know the assist rate's been like really low, but it's also just like he doesn't have the ball to make those decisions on this Duke team. And like, I trust Kaman as a passer. Like, I like the Basketball Without Borders tape and stuff like that, like the stuff he did as a passer. Like, I just love Kaman. Like, I just love guys that have like those measurements and like have a level of like ball skill and grace. Like, it's just hard to find. But I think Ace is like in close to that mix. And I thought your point about the floater and like the middle game is so good too, because I thought Georgia, I can't remember which game it was. I was watching one game the other day where like the team, whoever they were playing, it was like doing some 2-3 zone stuff. And like they put him at like the elbow and nail. And like his passing is like really good there. And a lot of NBA teams run actions where like they have a big man, either like high post or elbow or nail. And like with him, if he can then go to like pass fake and then into a shot, like whatever, just to get like those little itty bitty bits of space for himself before getting into looks in that middle area, that would just open up another area of the floor for him to score in. And then again, also further accentuate that passing and improve his overall gravity as a scorer. And then, defensively, like, so where do you see him as more of like a 4 or a 5 defensively? Because like I really like him on the perimeter. I like his timing. The motor is really good. Really good helping from the weak side, but I feel like when he's like a true 5, I feel like his discipline and like strength becomes a little bit more of an issue when it's like ball screen coverage stuff. Do you see him more as like a 4 or a true 5?
I think if I'm projecting out the next level, I think his best calling is at the 4, but there's times, depending on the teams that might potentially be in the mix to get him, I think he can be in a hybrid in terms of 4-5 role. But
totally.
And there's been times where he's been on the floor. I know he played Marquette and he played, I think it was Georgia Tech. I think it was Georgia Tech. One of those two, which I think that might have been the team. Are you talking about the 2-3?
Yeah, it was. It was. Yep, that was the game.
That game, I think there was a lot of opportunity there. He was playing as a sole 5, and there wasn't times that he was really moved off the ball. But of course, when you're playing against college versus grown men, I think that's one of those concerns that you mentioned, where when you're mentioning guys like Jokic and Embiid, these are guys that you're going to have to see on a nightly basis. And I think one of those things in terms of strength, ability that he has against guys like that, he might struggle. But in terms of his fluidity, I think that's what's going to really help him as a 4, and projecting good on that end. So I really like that. I think for him, 4 would be his best suiting. I think that's where I'm going to probably want to see him ramp up more in terms of his perimeter shooting. But I think on terms of the defensive end, the perimeter stuff that you like to see, and what he offers as a rim protector, you gotta love it. So I think for me,
Yeah.
from that end, respective to Kaman, I think something that we don't mention enough of is his ability to be really great in terms of his drop coverage. For a guy at 7'2", he is very fluid. And I think I think the thing that really impressed me from his time from Basketball Without Borders to now, he's made really great strides in terms of like his understanding of like angles, in terms of coverage playing, hand placement, backpedaling. He's really shown his growth there, and he's still playing. He's still growing well. And I think it's one of those things where it's really encouraging to see stuff like that, and his fluidity on that end. Showed a lot of it against the Arizona game. I think he was hurt in terms of cramping, but yeah, a lot to love in terms of his overall rim protection ability. Again, he really likes to funnel players into others, and when you have a guy like Cooper, and it's really good to understand when to pass, when to hedge, pressing on screens. I love what I'm seeing from him. So again, that's one of those things where when I raise the question about upside, you have to have a guy like him at the highest. Especially when I'm looking at a guy, for example, like a Derek Lively, where I really look at him in that closest mold, especially in that Duke system, where if he's a guy that is able to be a really freak rim protector, offer himself as a rim lob threat, and kind of find his playmaking. I think it's one of those things where you kind of want to see more from him in terms of the playmaking department. He's kind of some issues there, respective to a guy like Lively, where he's really good in terms of passing. But I think in terms of like mold, that's where he can see success and a pathway to goodness in the league. So yeah, I really like what I'm saying from Kaman and Asa. I think Rockwood's just it's the same way that I was looking at. I think it was a guy we were talking in the beginning where he was number 6 on my board initially preseason, and then I think he's just fell out. And I was always going to say, previous year at NBL, I was always like, this guy's playing really short minutes, under 20 minutes a game in the NBL, but I was kind of projecting him out. If he does get an increase in minute and usage, that's where I'm projecting him that high. But yeah, it's kind of one of those things where I'm not seeing that kind of increase and that kind of play improve. So he's kind of out of my picture. I think I have him like 27th, 26th right now.
Yep.
And I'm really just riding off of the defensive ability that he brings in terms of as an interior force. But for guys like Kaman and Asa, those are, two clear lottery talents in terms of upside and production. And you've really got to love what you're seeing from them in their respective games. But yeah, I really like what I'm seeing from those two.
Yeah, I think Asa and Kaman just both have like a pretty clear, like athletic, physical edge combined with a feel edge that like just really kind of separates them. Last one out.
Yeah, I think for me, those are two clear big men talents. And I don't know, it's just one of those things where as I'm kind of watching big men, I think footwork and fluidity is just, I think that just has to be like a non-negotiable at this point. When I'm looking at guys that are able to really be really good movers on the ball, and especially in the way that we're watching the NBA kind of progress in terms of a lot of ISO, a lot of heliocentric offenses, drop cover. Like I need to see guys flourish on that end, or they will be hunted, especially come playoff time. And I'm with these two guys that we're mentioning in terms of Kaman and Asa. They're showing a lot of great strides in that measure. So a lot to love with those two guys. So
yeah. So the last one I'm going to throw at you here, and this one, like unlike the Traore question, this is a question where like I do kind of like both these guys and think like they're rated properly. Are we sure that Rasheer Fleming shouldn't be rated closer to JT Toppin on big board? So Toppin right now, usually late first, early second. Both these guys, great rebounders, don't have the greatest passing feel. I'll kind of get into that a little bit. Like semi-suspect shooters where like Rasheer really lets it fly, but the percentages haven't been great. Like Toppin's similar, but like lower volume, but both like guys that are like motor forwards that just make stuff happen. How do you feel about them? And like, do you think there is like a gap here?
I think it's a refreshing conversation to have, especially about rebounding, especially when you come from a Rocco guy that is very rebound averse to guys like JT Toppin. Like these are rebounding is the clear opposite side of the spectrum where, for me, I think I seen a tweet today talking about like things that won't show up on a stat sheet, but boxing out and actually being tenacious in terms of actually wanting to go out and get the rebound. Guys like JT Toppin are at the top of the list when it comes to these kind of qualities, and I really like what I'm seeing from JT Toppin. I think the move to Texas Tech was one of the best that he could have made, and he's being able to show that he can score. I think one of the things heading into it, especially from moving from previous to now, wanting to see him be able to show more in terms of his perimeter shooting and overall scoring, and he's been doing very well. And I think that's one of the things where I'm kind of hell-bent between him and Rasheed Fleming, where for Rasheed, I'm loving what I'm seeing in terms of his two-way stretchability. Again, the three-point shooting is really enticing, 37.5% on 4 attempts a game. That's one of those things where he is shooting, but in terms of the volume versus on the other end where it's a guy like JT, where I'm not really seeing high percentage but very low volume. I like what I'm seeing from Rasheed Fleming. I think it is definitely important to kind of have that conversation that they definitely should be closer. I would definitely have JT Talman ahead, but in terms of most underrated prospects, in terms of this class, Rasheed Fleming has to be one of them in terms of what he provides of his athleticism, shooting, the size, kind of that mix of his finishing. Also the stocks. You got to love what you're seeing from him. I think he's 2 steals, 1 block a game. He is just everywhere. And I think that's one of the things that I really like in terms of these kind of hybrid forwards that can do a lot and also be able to provide inherent value as a shooter. And just the interior force. He does a lot of things very well. So
totally.
I like what I'm seeing from him. I think right now, I think the earliest thing that I've seen him from boards is like mid to late second round. But I think that's a good spot for him. Of course, as the season progresses, I'm definitely going to probably see him play more. But he's definitely a mismatch player, and I like what I'm seeing from him on that end. But yeah, I think he's one of the things where he loves to dunk a lot. I don't really see a mid-range game from him, which is kind of surprising. It's really just it's dunker threes. So but for him, he's been showing all the utmost potential in terms of the 2 ends. I don't think he's averaged less than 3 stocks a game this season in each game that he's played. So he's been everywhere. But for JT, I think he's a guy that I don't see enough people talking enough about him and what he provides in terms of him on the glass and as a scorer on the inside. And you hope that the perimeter shooting does catch up. I think in the last couple of games, he hasn't really shot it at all or made any. But I think for him, if he's able to kind of allow that perimeter shooting to catch up to a respectable number, there will be really serious value in terms of what he could bring on that end. But again, for him, he's a guy that's probably entering late first round talks for me for JT. And I could probably see a guy like Rasheed in terms of like 30 to 40, that range for him right now. In the way that he's playing, if he continues that up, definitely could be in that consideration for like really early second round consideration. So these 2 guys. What about you?
The other thing I like with Fleming too is he's a guy who's like young for the class. We know his wingspan from like Formula 1 or whatever, or F0, Formula 0. That's what it was. I think it was like a 7'3" or 7'4" wingspan. So like he's going to measure enormous. Yeah, he's going to measure really well. He's big, he's strong. I think like with Toppin, I think what people prefer about Toppin is I think there's just like a better level of like discipline and polish right now. Like Toppin's technique guarding on the perimeter is better. And like I know they're both low assist rate guys, but like watching the Texas Tech games last couple of games, like Toppin is making passes this year that he wasn't last year that he's just not getting rewarded for on, unfortunately. Like I thought he made a couple like real nice like cross court slings. One was back to the basket and one was facing up. And their game from yesterday, like I do think those assist numbers are actually going to go up for him as the year goes on. Where with Rasheed, like he is a bit behind him as a passer. But I've seen him like try some stuff as a passer this year that he hadn't in the past. Like he tried to make like this I think it was in the Texas Tech game, actually. He tried to throw like this interior like bounce pass between 2 guys and it didn't get there. But I was like, oh wow, like Rasheed Fleming would not have seen that pass 2 years ago. Like he's a guy I've monitored for a while, and I was like, that's new, and I like that. But I think the what he does have over Toppin is like the actual size. Like he is like Toppin was, I think like a hair under 6'7" or so at the combine. Like length is there. Production is clearly there. Like JT Toppin, I tweeted the other day, he's like immune to box outs. Like I was watching the Texas Tech game and like just rewinding constantly and like doing slow-mo where it's like, wait, this guy like had Toppin boxed out. Like he had everything that he was supposed to have, and like Toppin somehow still gets there. Like I don't know, but he's awesome.
Crazy,
this is not like a slander conversation as much as it is I really like Rasheed discussion. But I think with Rasheed, like he's really letting it fly from 3. I've always liked how it looked. They're starting to go in now. And I just think with him being like legitimate, like 4-ish small ball 5, like size and weight at like 240, like there's stuff that needs to be polished up. Like his closeout technique is rough. The passing like has to get better. The handle again, like I think it's a lot better than it was a year ago, but it's still like not great. Like there is like polish that's needed, but I just think the trajectory combined with like the overall frame and production, like I just wonder, like, would I rather take Rasheer and take the gamble on like polishing this stuff up, or would I rather take a top end who like might not quite have the size, but he's more productive right now, and then I just have to change the shot diet? Like, I think it's more. I think they're a lot closer than people think, and I think it's like solely out of a credit to Rasheer.
100%. And it's one of those things where when you project on the next end, for me, I think JT Topman, he probably can show that he's able to scale down, which that's where, when you look at the modern NBA, these kind of fours that are able to kind of offer a lot in the interior, be able to show some perimeter shooting ability, but also make it elsewhere in terms of his relentless motor, powerful rebounding. There's things that he shows that he's able to make his billing in the next level, especially in conference. But I think that's something that I'm really excited to watch. And I think he's going to be an all Big 12 guy. I love what I'm seeing from him. I think it was I was just about to say another Bethune-Cookman game. That was games I just seen two people box him out, and he's still coming out with boards on top. I think it was the game that they just recently played against Philon, where he averaged, I think, 5 offensive rebounds. So he has a knack for getting the ball no matter what happens. So for me, he's going to be a notable front court prospect this upcoming season, and I think I'm really willing to see him continue to kind of open up more in terms of the perimeter shooting. But for Rasheer, he's 20 years old. I think he's gonna be 20 years old up until July this year. So again, he plays a lot in terms of his motor and being able to defend up and down on the court. But yeah, I think as you mentioned, in terms of like a year-to-year progression, you are seeing strides be took, but it's one of those things where, in the NBA, they just take guys as is, but they also want to develop it on that end. So for me, it's one of those conversations where, Rasheer he's making that conversation be known. But at the current moment, when you're looking at guys like that and projecting them out, I'd probably take the guy that does have these skills and then being able to refine the shot. When you do have shot doctors in the NBA, they're able to kind of be able to improve it on them, and rather than guys that just don't have the skill set right there, or they're not as comfortable. Things like this are, things that he might get played off the floor because of. So but you have to love the shooting, you have to love the motor, great feel. Obviously, you gotta love the spacing of the floor. So, in the way that we're looking at the game progress in terms of 4s and 5s. And how they're offering stretchability, you gotta love it. So I'm really excited. This conversation, I think, is one that will be had in a couple of months' time that is a lot closer than what they're getting respective to Fleming. But yeah, I think these two guys, respective in their own right, are doing some really great things, and they definitely deserve a lot more recognition. I mentioned a guy like, for example, Yaxel Landeborg, who, these kind of 6'9". He is so good. I think these kind of 6'9" stretch guys that offer a lot in terms of rebounding, feel on the ball and comfortability there, and kind of hoping that the perimeter shooting catches up. For a guy like Landeborg, I think he's shooting like 31% from the perimeter. So they're kind of all like in that similar respect of, if this shot can be consistent, all the supplementary skills that they have will just allow them to project really well in the next end. So again, I'm loving the kind of build of these kind of upperclassmen, older guys that are offering a lot more in terms of other skills versus, younger talent and betting on the potential. But man, this class in terms of upperclassmen sleepers, it's one of the best in recent years. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, there's a lot of them that have just real positional skill and size that was so lacking with the depth the last couple of years, where it's been this guy's good, but I think there might be a bit higher of ceilings on some of these guys. And a lot of them have just quirky developmental backgrounds and stuff like that this year too, which I think is interesting. But yeah, I'm really excited for the season progressing, kind of see where these guys go. We're going to wrap it up there. Mohammed, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on social media on Twitter at MCFXC. I have it in my name, MCFXC. You can find me on Twitter. Just it's content season, so I'm just churning out a lot of content in terms of draft content, college hoops, NBA stuff. But man, I'm loving this season. This season in terms of what we're seeing from underclassmen, upperclassmen guys, some overseas stuff. It's just a lot of content and a lot of hoops. So I'm super excited. And you could probably catch me talking a lot more in terms of this content. I love what you're doing, Max, in terms of underrated sleepers. That was how I was able to find you in the first place in terms of draft Sickos. And that was one of those things where it was really nice to be a watcher of the show and then ultimately being able to come here and speak about some questions with you. So I'm super excited for what the season's holding. And man, it's gonna be a great season, a great cycle ahead. And I'm excited, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you were able to come on the show. I kind of reached out to you and just hey, you want to be on the show? We never really talked before, but I was like, this guy's good. I want to have him on the show. So I appreciate you bouncing on the opportunity, man. So make sure you're following him on Twitter. Make sure you're following me at Boundboards. Follow us at No Ceilings NBA and stay tuned with us. So we've got a whole lot of basketball in front of us. So we'll see you all next week. Have a great day.